The call came on a Tuesday morning, which I always thought was a strange day for the world to change. I was in the middle of making oatmeal. The kind my husband Harold used to say tasted like wallpaper paste. But I never stopped making it because it was cheap and it was warm. And at 63 years old, cheap and warm still matters. My son called from a number I didn't recognize. And when I heard his voice, I knew something had shifted. "Dad's gone," he said. I turned off the burner. I set the spoon down on the counter. I looked out my kitchen window at the same oak tree I'd been looking at for 11 years, since I moved into this little rental on Birchwood Lane, and I thought, okay, so it's done. My ex-husband Leonard had been sick for 8 months, pancreatic cancer. My son had told me when it was first diagnosed, and I'd said I was sorry, and I meant it, even after everything. You don't spend 26 years with someone without caring, at least a little, whether they live or die. But Leonard and I had been divorced for 11 years, and in those 11 years, he had built a second life that had nothing to do with me. The funeral was Friday. I almost didn't go. My sister called from Phoenix and told me I didn't owe him anything, that showing up would only give people something to talk about. She wasn't wrong. But my son asked me to come. He said it quietly, the way he used to ask for things when he was small. Not demanding, just hoping, and I couldn't say no to that voice. I never could, so I drove the 4 hours to Columbus, checked into a Holiday Inn off the highway, and hung my black dress on the back of the bathroom door and stared at it for a long time. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. Leonard and I got married in 1987. I was 26, he was 29, and we were the kind of young that believes love is enough to solve most problems. For a while, maybe it was. We had our son, then our daughter. We had a house in Gahanna with a porch swing and a garden I was actually proud of. We had cookouts on the 4th of July and church on Christmas Eve, and all the regular American things that feel like proof you're doing it right. What we also had, though Leonard kept it well hidden for years, was debt. Not the ordinary kind. Not a credit card balance or a car loan run long. I'm talking about the kind of debt that arrives in the form of men who don't knock. Who just appear at your door on a Saturday morning while your daughter is still in her pajamas eating cereal. Leonard had been borrowing money from people he shouldn't have, investing in things that weren't what he said they were, and making promises he had no way of keeping. The first time I understood how bad it was, I was sitting across from a man named Ed Kowalski at a folding table in our garage, and Ed was explaining to me, very calmly, that Leonard owed him $60,000 and that he expected to be paid. I didn't have $60,000. I didn't have $6,000. I was a part-time bookkeeper at a dental office making $14 an hour. Leonard stood next to me holding his car keys like he might need to run. I won't tell the whole story of what came next, because it spans years, and it's complicated, and parts of it I'm still ashamed of, even though the shame was never rightfully mine to carry. The short version is this. Leonard's problems were bigger than Ed Kowalski. There were other debts, there were other men, and eventually, there was a federal investigation into a business my husband had been involved with. A real estate investment scheme that had taken money from dozens of people in Central Ohio. I knew about the business. I did not know it was a scheme. That distinction took years and a great deal of legal work to establish. Leonard had a lawyer, a good one, a man named Whitfield who wore bow ties and spoke in complete sentences and who sat Leonard down early in the process and explained that the evidence was substantial and the outcome was not going to be good. The question, Whitfield said, was how bad. I found out later that around this time, Leonard started talking to our daughter. She was 24 at the time, already out of the house, already engaged to a man from Westerville who worked in commercial insurance and had, as far as I could tell, no opinion about anything. She had always been her father's daughter in the ways that were visible, same jaw, same laugh, same ability to walk into a room and immediately know who had the most money in it. What Leonard told her, I learned much later, was a version of events that made me the architect of his troubles. He told her I had pushed him toward the investments, that I had wanted the bigger house, the nicer vacations, the things that required money he didn't honestly have. That he'd made bad decisions trying to keep me happy. None of that was true. Or she chose to believe him. Those are different things, and I've spent a long time trying to understand which one it was. What happened next, what I agreed to, which was the decision that cost me the most, came out of a conversation I had with Leonard one night in the kitchen 3 months before the federal charges were finalized. He sat across from me and he cried. Real tears. I had seen Leonard cry maybe 4 times in 26 years of marriage, and each time it had undone me a little. He said he was scared. He said prison would destroy him. He said he knew he had no right to ask me anything, and then he asked me anyway. There were certain records, he said, financial documents with my name on them, joint accounts, shared filings, that could be interpreted in the wrong light as evidence of my participation. Whitfield had explained this. The prosecutors might try to name me as a co-conspirator. Not because the evidence was strong, but because it was there and because that's what prosecutors do. Or, Leonard said, I could sign something, a statement of my own, something that made clear I had been involved in certain decisions, not the fraud itself. There was a line, Whitfield had drawn it carefully, but the financial decisions surrounding it. Something that would redirect enough of the investigation's attention to get Leonard a reduced sentence and get my name removed from the federal complaint entirely. I sat there in that kitchen for a long time. My lawyer, I had my own by then, a woman named Patricia who had short gray hair and the patience of someone who had heard everything, told me not to do it. She told me Leonard's situation was his own and that no judge would look favorably on a woman who had clearly been kept in the dark. She said I had a real chance of walking away clean. But Leonard said something else before I answered. He said, if this goes badly for me, I'll make sure our daughter knows you could have stopped it. I don't know if that was a threat or a fear or just the way scared people talk. I've never been sure, but I looked at my daughter's face in my mind, the way she already looked at me with something guarded in her eyes, already pulling away, already half convinced I was the problem, and I thought, I cannot lose her too. So I signed. The statement I signed was not a confession to fraud. Patricia made sure of that. She was careful and she was thorough, and she later told me it was the hardest document she'd ever been asked to help draft. What it was, in practical terms, was an acknowledgement of involvement in certain financial decisions that, taken together, allowed Leonard's attorneys to negotiate a significantly reduced sentence. He served 14 months at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. I served nothing, legally. But I served in other ways. The people who lost money in Leonard's scheme, and there were many of them, some who lost their savings, one couple who lost money they'd set aside for their granddaughter's college. Those people needed somewhere to put their anger. And I was there. I was the wife. I had signed the statement. I was, as far as the community was concerned, complicit. I lost my job at the dental office, not fired officially, but the atmosphere became what it became, and I left. I lost friends, women I'd known for 20 years who stopped calling, not all at once, but one by one, the way a tide goes out. I lost the house in Gahanna, which was expected, but I also lost most of what I'd thought was a community, and that was the part that took longer to grieve. My daughter stopped talking to me about a year after the trial. She told me, during our last real conversation for a long time, that she couldn't respect what I had done, that I had covered for a man who had hurt people, that she was embarrassed. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to explain the whole thing, the statement, the calculation, the reason I had done it. But I had made a choice, and the choice had a shape that couldn't be unseen. And somewhere underneath all my explanations was the quieter truth that I had done it partly for her, to keep Leonard out of prison long enough, intact enough, to remain her father, and telling her that felt like asking her to carry a weight she hadn't asked for. So I let her be angry. For 11 years, I let her be angry. Leonard, for his part, rebuilt. By the time he got out of prison, the economy had shifted and real estate had come back, and Leonard still had charm and contacts and the particular confidence of a man who had always believed that consequences were temporary. He started over in Florida, then came back to Ohio. He remarried a woman named, I don't know her name actually. I never learned it. My son mentioned her once and I didn't ask. What Leonard built in the years after was substantial. I heard about it in pieces, through my son, through the occasional overheard comment at family events I had attended cautiously, on the margins. A construction management company. Properties in Columbus and Cincinnati. A portfolio that, by the time he was 62 and diagnosed with cancer, had grown to something that required professional management. He died worth somewhere around $180 million. I didn't know the number, not until the call came. The morning of the will reading, I woke up in my Holiday Inn room before the alarm, the way I always do when something is happening. I made bad coffee with the little machine on the dresser and sat in the chair by the window and watched the parking lot fill up slowly with mourning. My son had called the night before to tell me he thought I should come to the attorney's office. Not just the funeral, the reading. I said I didn't think that was appropriate, and he said, "Mom, you should come," and there was something in his voice that made me stop asking questions. My daughter didn't know I'd be there when I walked into the waiting room of the law office on North High Street. Clean glass and pale wood, the kind of office that tells you before anyone speaks that things here are serious. She looked up from her phone and went completely still. She was 51 now. I still sometimes couldn't believe it. She looked like me in the eyes and like Leonard everywhere else, and the combination was something I had never stopped finding beautiful and a little heartbreaking. "What is she doing here?" she said to my son. He said, "Dad asked her to be here." My daughter laughed. It was a short sound, not happy. Dad left her $50. Symbolic. She held eye contact with me for a moment. There was a satisfaction in her expression that she didn't bother to hide. "No offense, Mom, but you made your choices." I found a seat near the window and looked at my hands. The attorney was a composed woman in her 50s named Ms. Aldridge, who had clearly done this hundreds of times and had the particular stillness of someone who has learned not to anticipate other people's reactions. She set a leather portfolio on the table. She poured water for everyone. She let us settle. My son sat beside me. My daughter sat across, her husband next to her, already doing the calculation. I could see it in the way his eyes moved. Ms. Aldridge opened the portfolio. She said, "Leonard made several amendments to this document over the past 18 months. I want to make sure everyone understands that the version I'm reading today is the final notarized version completed 6 weeks before his death." My daughter nodded. "Of course." Ms. Aldridge began to read. There were disbursements to charities Leonard had supported, a veterans organization, a scholarship fund at Ohio State. There was a provision for the house in Dublin, which went to the second wife in a separate agreement. There were smaller amounts to various people, staff, I assumed, or friends I didn't know. And then Ms. Aldridge said my daughter's name. She paused, the way attorneys do. "To my daughter, I leave the sum of $50 to acknowledge our relationship." The room went very quiet. My daughter said, "I'm sorry, could you read that again?" Ms. Aldridge read it again. The number didn't change. I watched my daughter's face. The satisfaction drained out of it so completely and so quickly that what was left looked almost young, almost like the girl she'd been before everything, and it broke my heart a little even then. Her husband put his hand on her arm. She shook it off. "There must be a mistake," she said. Miss Aldridge said, "There's no mistake. Would you like me to continue?" My daughter said nothing. Miss Aldridge continued. "The rest of the estate, properties, business interests, investment accounts, the portfolio that had grown in Leonard's last years to a figure I still have difficulty holding in my head, was left to me. Not some of it, not a portion, a gesture, a symbol, all of it, $173 million. And then Ms. Aldridge set down the portfolio and reached for a second envelope. "Leonard also left a letter," she said, "to be read aloud at this meeting. He was very specific about that." She opened it. I want to tell you that I was ready for what came next. I want to say I had suspected, had known, had felt something building. But the truth is that I was gripping the arm of my chair and looking at a water stain on the ceiling and trying to remember how to breathe. Miss Aldridge read Leonard's letter. He began with our daughter's name. He said he had loved her fiercely and imperfectly, which was true of everything he'd ever done. He said he had told her things, years ago, that were not true, that he had placed the blame for his failures on her mother in order to protect himself, and that it was the action of a coward, and that he had known it was cowardly even as he did it. He said that her mother had not pushed him toward anything, that every financial decision that led to the investigation had been his alone, that I had been kept in the dark, not by accident but deliberately, because he had known what I would say if I'd known. He said that I had signed a document 11 years ago not because I was guilty, but because I had been trying to protect him. And, he wrote, because she was trying to hold our family together the way she always did quietly, without anyone noticing. He said he'd been watching, from a distance, for years, that he knew what the community's anger had cost me, that he knew our daughter had believed his version of events and had punished me for it for over a decade. He said, I am asking you, now that I can't ask it in person, to consider what your mother gave up. Not for me. I didn't deserve it, but for you. So that you would still have a father. My daughter was crying. I hadn't seen her cry in so long that the sound of it startled me. Her husband had stopped doing calculations. Leonard's letter ended with this: I know I handled very little of my life with any grace. I am asking my estate to make one thing right. She earned it. She earned all of it. Not just the money, but the truth. And the truth is long overdue. Miss Aldridge folded the letter and placed it on the table. The room was so quiet I could hear traffic outside. I don't know how long we sat there. It might have been 2 minutes. It felt like something was being rewritten, the way you sometimes feel a shift in your chest before you have words for it. My daughter looked at me. She looked at me the way she used to when she was very small, maybe 5 or 6, when she'd done something she wasn't proud of and was trying to decide whether to pretend she hadn't. Open, uncertain, a little undone. Mom, she said, and stopped. I waited. I didn't know, she said. I believed him. I believed he was telling me the truth. I know, I said. All this time. I know. She pressed her hands against her face and breathed out, long and slow. Her husband put his hand on her back, and this time she didn't shake it off. I thought about what I'd imagined this moment might look like, if it ever came. I had imagined it different ways over the years. Sometimes I was vindicated and calm. Sometimes I was bitter. Once or twice I had fantasized about saying the exact right thing that would make her feel every year of distance at once. But sitting in that room, in that gray morning light, all I felt was tired. And then, under the tired, something that was not quite relief but was close to it. Like setting down a bag you'd carried so long you'd forgotten it was heavy. I looked at my daughter. I thought, she's 51. She's going to have to live with this. Come here, I said. She crossed the room. It was maybe 8 feet, but it seemed to take a long time, and she sat next to me, and she put her head on my shoulder the way she hadn't since she was a teenager, and she cried in a way that had nothing polished about it. I put my arm around her. Outside, the traffic kept moving. Miss Aldridge gave us the room. Mice sat across from me and looked at the table, and I could see from his expression that he had known. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. Enough to call me on a Tuesday morning and ask me to come. Enough to make sure I was in that room. I would ask him about it later. He would tell me Leonard had talked to him as in the last weeks. The morphine was making Leonard honest in a way he'd never been when he was well. He would say that his father had spent a lot of time in those last weeks, trying to get things in the right order. I thought about Leonard in that last hospital room. I thought about what it costs to finally tell the truth when you've been lying for 20 years. I didn't feel generous toward him exactly. I wasn't sure I ever would. But I thought, at least he got there. Some people don't. That was 7 months ago. I still live on Birchwood Lane. I still have the oak tree outside my kitchen window, and I still make oatmeal most mornings because habits are habits even when your circumstances change. The financial details are still being sorted. There are lawyers and accountants and a great deal of paperwork that I don't fully understand yet, though I'm learning. Patricia, my old attorney, came out of semi-retirement to help me. She said it was the most interesting case she'd seen in years. I told her I could have done with considerably less interesting. My daughter and I talk now. Not every day. We're still finding our way back to each other, and some distances take time to close even when the reason for them is gone. But she calls on Sunday mornings, and last month she drove down and we sat on the porch and drank coffee and watched the oak tree, and at some point she reached over and took my hand and held it for a minute without saying anything. That was enough. It was more than enough. I've been asked by a few people who know the story whether I'm angry, whether I feel like I lost 11 years that should have been different. And the honest answer is yes, sometimes. Some mornings I wake up and I feel the weight of what those years cost me. The friendships, the work, the relationship with my daughter, the version of my 60s I might have had if things had been different. That anger is real and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But I've also started to understand that the story I was living all those years wasn't the one I thought it was. I thought I was the woman who had lost everything, who was paying for someone else's sins, who had been forgotten and set aside. And I was that woman. But I was also, it turns out, the woman Leonard trusted with the ending. He gave me the last word. In his own strange, late, imperfect way, he made sure I got to finish the sentence. I don't know what to do with $173 million. I'm 63 years old and I've been living carefully for a long time, and the scale of it is still something I can't quite make real. But I know a few things I want to do. I want to find the couple who lost their retirement savings. Their names were in the court records, and I've already asked Patricia to locate them. I want to set up something for them, something real. I know it won't undo what happened, but it's a start. I want to take my daughter somewhere she's always wanted to go. She mentioned Iceland once, years ago before we stopped talking. I've been thinking about that, and I want to keep making oatmeal on Tuesday mornings, in my kitchen on Birchwood Lane, looking at the oak tree. Because some things you keep not because they're extraordinary, but because they're yours. Harold used to say the oatmeal tasted like wallpaper paste. He also used to say I was the most patient woman he'd ever known. I think, finally, I'm starting to believe him.